The Ark of the Covenant, in Hebrew, is called Aron HaBrith or the Ark of the Testimony, Aron HaEdith in Hebrew. Torah gives exacting instruction for the construction of the Ark, its cover, and the two cherubim in Exodus 25 verses 10 to 22. The tablets of the law which Moses brought down from Mount Sinai were placed inside the Ark, and the Ark was housed within the Holy of Holies. Only the Kohen Gadol or high priest would enter there, and only on the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur. Unlike the other sacred vessels created by the Temple Institute for use in the Third Holy Temple, the Ark of the Covenant is a replica. The original Ark created in the desert lies hidden in a chamber beneath the Temple Mount, and will be unveiled or revealed with the building of the temple. So, according to the rabbis of the Temple Institute, it was not lost during the destruction of Solomon's temple but will be revealed or shown to the public soon, when the temple is rebuilt. According to Josephus, a Jewish historian who witnessed the destruction of Herod's temple in 70 AD, the Holy of Holies was an empty room without the Ark of the Covenant, which was lost during the Babylonian captivity, 600 years BC, and it was never returned nor reconstructed. Jewish rabbis of the Temple Institute and the Temple Mount faithful believed that it was hidden in a secret tunnel beneath the Holy of Holies by the godly King Josiah of Judah, sensing that the Babylonians will loot it and destroy it. If Jerusalem is conquered, hid it in the secret tunnel under the Temple Mount. The two-winged cherubim, or in Hebrew, cherubium of the mercy seat, which is of one piece of beaten gold on top of the golden lid of the Ark of the Covenant. The sages of Israel teach that when Israel was acting according to God's will, the two cherubims would face one another and embraced. When Israel were not performing God's will, the two cherubims would turn their faces away from one another. A reconstruction of a replica have been completed. Here's a photo of a replica of the entire Ark of the Covenant or Testimony with its cherubim and lid, the reconstruction of which have been completed by the Temple Institute. The Temple Institute and the Temple Mount faithful rabbis believe that the original Ark of the Covenant made by Moses still exists today and is hidden somewhere beneath the caves of the Temple Mount, in tunnel leading directly to below the spot where it once stood above, in the Holy of Holies, and have been discovered and will be revealed soon when the third temple is rebuilt. So, let's watch out for the next breaking Israel news of the revelation or unveiling of the lost Ark of the Covenant in the future to the public. You can still visit the Temple Institute today to see firsthand all the 93 reconstructed items of the Holy Temple before they are all moved up to the Temple Mount and placed within it, once the temple is dedicated after about 2,000 years. At that time, even the ordinary priests will not be able to see the Ark of the Covenant which is behind the veil, except the high priest on Yom Kippur once a year, but only the three main items placed inside the holy place of the sanctuary, namely the golden incense altar, the golden table of the showbread and the menorah and its utensils. Non-priests and Gentiles can see them only during the three pilgrimage feasts of Pesach or Passover, weeks, or Shavuot and Sukkot or Tabernacles. the Temple Mount and the Land of Israel Faithful Movement. Besides the Temple Institute led by Yisrael Ariel, with its aim to reconstruct and restore the stone altars, furnitures, vessels, utensils, and the garments of the priests and curtains of the coming Third Temple, there is another movement called the Temple Mount and the Land of Israel Faithful Movement, led by another ex-Israeli IDF officer, Mr. Gershon Salomon, who has also the plan to reconstruct the temple building itself. Here is he seen rallying the Jews on a major Jewish festival to the Temple Mount to persuade the Israeli government to start rebuilding the temple immediately by laying the 2 cornerstones on Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, the 5th Jewish month commemorating the destruction of the 2 temples. The leadership of the Temple Mount Faithful Movement. Gershon Salomon is the founder and leader of the Temple Mount and Land of Israel Faithful Movement. Gershon was an officer in the Israel Defense Force or IDF. He is a 10th-generation Jerusalemite, descended from Rabbi Avram Solomon Zalman Zorel, who settled in Jerusalem in 1811. Rabbi Zorel was the first Jewish pioneer in Jerusalem to start the redemptive process of the people and the land by rebuilding the desolated land. He even sent out one of his sons to locate the 10 lost tribes to bring them back to the land of Israel, because he knew that the return of the 10 lost tribes was a condition for the redemptive process. Rabbi Zorel was assassinated by the Arabs who thought they could stop this godly process. Even as a child, Gershon knew that God was calling him to continue the work for the redemption of the people of Israel. As a youth, Gershon was involved in the 1948 War of Independence, where he was arrested at the age of 11 by the British Mandate Police. Later, when he joined the IDF, he led a company in the Golan Heights. During a battle in 1958 with the Syrian army, Gershon was injured accidentally when, in the heat and confusion of the battle, he was run over by a tank. Syrian soldiers, who were trained to shoot again any wounded Israeli soldiers, had begun to take over the battlefield. Suddenly, when they were about to fire upon Gershon, they all ran away. Later, these soldiers reported to the United Nations officers that they had seen thousands of angels around this IDF officer and had, therefore, fled. It was at this time that Gershon heard the voice of God speaking to him that he was not yet finished with him. Gershon Salomon understood this as a divine call to consecrate himself to the work of the Temple Mount. After spending an entire year in the hospital, Gershon had recovered sufficiently to return to his unit, even though he was walking on crutches. He continued his service in the defense of the land of Israel. He feels that the greatest moment of his life, so far, was his participation in the liberation of the Temple Mount and Jerusalem during the 1967 Six-Day War. He believes that at that moment the circle was closed between his generation and the generation of the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. After the 6 Days War, the then defense minister of Israel, Moshe Dayan, made a terrible decision when he turned control of the Temple Mount back to the Muslim authorities of Jerusalem. Gershon recognized the tragedy of this action, and formed the Temple Mount and the Land of Israel Faithful Movement. Since that time, he had dedicated himself to the vision of consecration the Temple Mount to the name of God, to removing the Muslim shrines placed there as a symbol of Muslim conquest, to the rebuilding of the Third Temple on the Temple Mount, and the godly redemption of the people and the land of Israel. Here in this photo, Gershon Salomon, the IDF officer, is seen with his crutch on the right, wearing an army helmet on the Temple Mount with other fellow IDF officers, standing before the Dome of the Rock which they had captured only a few hours earlier, at the liberation of the Temple Mount and Jerusalem on the 3rd day of the Six-Day War on the 7th of July 1967. Again, Gershon Salomon is seen at the Dome of the Rock, and at the Western or Wailing Wall, his face looking up to heaven, thanking God, and knowing that the circle of his generation with that of the generation of the temple when it was destroyed 70 AD, after 1897 years have been closed. These photos are some of the earliest images of the reconquest of the Temple Mount, where Israeli soldiers climbed up the golden dome of the rock to place the Israeli flag at the summit, which unfortunately, 11 hours later was asked to be removed by Israel Defense Minister Moshe Dayan out of fear of World War III by another massive Islamic invasion from all the Muslim countries of the world. The victorious IDF soldiers surrounded themselves around the Islamic Golden Dome of the Rock Shrine on the Temple Mount or at the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound with Israeli flags on the 7th of July 1967, the third day into the 6 days war, which resulted on the 10th in a resounding victory for the Jewish nation when the Sinai, the West Bank, Jerusalem, the Temple Mount and the Golan Heights were wrestled back from Egypt, Jordan, and Syria and were annexed again as Israel's possession after 1897 years. But in the world's eyes as occupied territories in their land that God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob or Israel their forefathers. Shone Solomon and his first cornerstone for the third temple soon to be rebuilt seen again, at the Western Wall on Thursday the 4th of October 2001, on the Festival of Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles, 17th of Tishri, in the Hebrew year, 5762. A priest of the Temple Mount faithful ready to draw water from the pool of Siloam to consecrate the first cornerstone on Sukkot or the Feast of Tabernacles on 17th Tishri 5762 or Thursday the 4th of October 2001. A priest anointing the cornerstone with the water drawn from the pool of Siloam on Sukkot or the Feast of Tabernacles on 17th Tishri 5762 or Thursday the 4th of October 2001. Bronze laver and basin for the priests to wash before and after the temple service, made by the Temple Mount Faithful Movement Organization and shown on the Festival of Sukkot or the Feast of Tabernacles on the 17th of Tishri, the 7th Jewish month, in the Hebrew year 5762 or Thursday, the 4th of October 2001. Seen here is a temple model made by the Temple Mount Faithful Organization on display on the Festival of Sukkot or the Feast of Tabernacles, 17th of Tishri 5762, which was the 4th of October 2001. A priest in his white garments on the right photo is shown to the large crowd in front of the Temple Mount on another Festival of Sukkot or the Feast of Tabernacles, 17th of Tishri, 5764 or Monday, the 13th of October 2003, 2 years later. The two cornerstones, cut, carved and ready to be placed as the foundation stone for the third temple. Each stone weigh in about 6.5 tons and were cut without any metal or iron instruments by a Jewish stonemason named Ezra Elafi, whose stonemason ancestors helped to rebuild the second temple of the returning exile. The two cornerstones for the third temple on the move again to the Temple Mount on the 17th Tishri, in the Hebrew year, 5764 or Monday the 13th of October 2003 during the Festival of Sukkot or the Feast of Tabernacles. A symbolic Pesach or Passover lamb sacrifice was performed on the Mount of Olives as an opening for the real one, which will soon be performed on the Temple Mount by the Temple Mount faithful's priests. On Monday, the 5th of April 2004, or the 14th Nisan 5764, a few hours before the start of the Feast of Pesach or Passover, a symbolic Passover lamb sacrifice was performed on the Mount of Olives in front of the Holy of Holies, the location of which was so close and was seen so clearly from the place where the sacrifice was performed by all the faithful. Despite the fact that it was a symbolic sacrifice, as according to biblical law, a full sacrifice can only be held on the Temple Mount, it again renewed the most important event of the Pesach holiday that their Jewish forefathers were strict to hold on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem for thousands of years until the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. End-time prophecy becomes a reality in the Temple Mount faithful pilgrimage in harvesting of the wave sheaves offering and collecting the soil of the land of Israel to be scattered on the Temple Mount. 1934 years after the temple had laid in ruins and the Jewish people has been exiled, the Temple Mount and Land of Israel faithful movement made a pilgrimage and marched to the Temple Mount during Pesach or Passover, 2004. They brought with them an Omer offering to the God of Israel as well as ground or soil from Gaza, Samaria, and Judea, symbolizing the deep connection of these biblical land of Israel to the focus of the land, on the Temple Mount, and to all the other part of the Promised Land. This exciting and holy event was held by the Temple Mount and Land of Israel faithful movement on the 17th Nisan, the third day of Pesach 5764 or Thursday, the 8th of April 2004 from 9 a.m., at a very critical time of prophetic redemption in Israel. Actually, the event started a day earlier on Wednesday when members of the movement went to the fields of Israel to cut the Omer, the first grain, to fulfill one of the most important commandments of God in the Torah, which their forefathers did for thousands of years as an important part of temple worship at Pesach or Passover. The grain which was cut was very beautiful, tall and full. This was as a result of the blessings of God on the land of Israel and a winter with much rain as a gift from God. It reminded them of the situation of the land in the biblical times and the blessings of God on the land to be a land of milk and honey. This was after almost 2,000 years of destruction and foreign control in the land, when the land became like a wilderness because the law of God, which said that the land can be a land of milk and honey only when Israel dwells in the land. Now when Israel has been brought back to the land by God, the land has again become a land of milk and honey. They were so grateful to bring the first fruits of this blessing as an offering to God on his holy mountain in Jerusalem, as an offering of thanks, appreciation, and love. On Thursday morning, the Omer was carried in baskets to the Temple Mount. The earth that were brought from Judea, Samaria, and Gaza was scattered around the holy site of God. This symbolized the deep connection between the God, the people, and the land of Israel. This renewed biblical event moved the hearts of everyone. The model of the Temple Mount, which was carried to the Temple Mount, the western wall and the western gate of the Temple Mount, was another exciting event after almost 2,000 years of destruction. The mountain of God, and many Israelis who came to the pilgrimage and for the priest blessings, could see the beautiful model of the temple. The message was that the temple should immediately be rebuilt. The model was brought as an opening for 1934 years of longing by the Jewish people and many other friends of God and people of Israel all over the world, who were told that the Temple Mount and the Land of Israel faith movement had already prepared the architectural plans for the third temple, and that the large cornerstones are ready for the start of the rebuilding process. The founder and leader of the Temple Mount and the Land of Israel faithful movement, standing on the right of the truck, carrying the two cornerstones on Tuesday, the 24th of July 2004, ready for that day Temple March on Tisha B'Av, or the 9th day of Av, the 5th Jewish month, 5764 in the Hebrew year. The small Hebrew characters on the large blue banner reads from top, right to left, Linu, Ayani, Amini Ha-Habithwi Aretz Yisrael, literally translated as movement of faithful ones for Mount of the Temple and Land of Israel. The larger Hebrew characters below read Eben Finna Labith Hamikdash Shilashi, which mean cornerstone for the third temple. The two cut marble cornerstones ready to move on Tisha B'Av, or the 9th day of the 5th month, 5764, which commemorates the destruction of the first and second temple, on Tuesday the 24th of July 2004. In the early hour of the morning, the Temple Mount Faithful organization took an important step towards the fulfillment of Bible prophecies, when they loaded the two cut cornerstones for the third temple onto a truck and carried them around the walls of Jerusalem and through the streets of downtown Jerusalem, displaying them with huge banners in large Hebrew characters that this is the cornerstone for the third temple. The cornerstones, each weighing about 6.5 tons, were cut according to biblical laws, not by the use of iron or other metal instruments but by diamond cutters. The top of the stones were covered with the flags of Israel with the Star of David and the flags of the Temple Mount Faithful movement, like a kuppah or wedding canopy, as a bride is taken to her marriage under a kuppah. The holiness and the Shekinah glory of the God of Israel covered the two stones, which soon after 1934 years were again seen in the city of God and the temple, the eternal capital of the God and the people of Israel. They will be rallying around the walls of the city of Jerusalem until they are allowed to be placed at their rightful place, at the top of the Temple Mount itself, said Gershon Salomon. Seen here are the two cornerstones on the truck with blue banner saying, the cornerstone for the third temple, and a police clearing the way, directing the traffic, as it moved its way through the streets of Jerusalem, giving honor to the holy stones. On Tisha B'Av, or on the 27th of July 2004, after the event of the truck moving along the walls and exhibiting the cornerstones around Jerusalem, the Temple Mount faithful asked many people to join them and march to the Temple Mount together, with a model of the third temple, which were carried as a clear message to the God of Israel that they are faithful to his vision and called to speedily rebuild his house, and the message to Israel that they are ready to rebuild it and make it a reality in their lives of this generation, and a message to all the world that nothing can prevent it, that no pressure from the world can stop the work of God, and his determination to make this vision a reality. Despite the fact that the Temple Mount was handed over the Muslim Authority unfortunately, as a sign of weakness for fear of possible Arab reactions and riots, their spirits and determination to make this vision of God a reality were inside the Temple Mount. As Joshua, who circled the walls of Jericho 7 times and blow the shofars until the walls fell, they will continue to circle the walls of the city of the Temple Mount until they will fall. In front of the eastern gate of the Temple Mount, the chairman of the Temple Mount faithful, Gershon Salomon, called on Prime Minister Ariel Sharon to accept and answer this message and not to miss the great privilege that God gave him to be a real leader of his people, to rebuild his temple and not to give in to the pressures that come from all over the world to give the biblical Jerusalem of Israel and other Bible areas and the lands to the Arab enemies of God and the people of Israel, so-called Palestinians, and not to establish a so-called Palestinian state or any other foreign state in the Holy Land that God gave only to Israel for a godly purpose in an eternal covenant. He also called on Sharon to open the gates to the Temple Mount to the cornerstone. He told the crowd that only the rebuilding of the temple will create a real peace when the enemies of Israel are removed from any part of the Holy Land, and that godly peace will also come to the rest of the world. He called on the people of Israel to stop praying at the Western or Wailing Wall, which was a sign of the destruction and exile, but to start immediately to worship only on the Temple Mount. On this anniversary of the twice destruction of the temple, called Tisha B'Av in Hebrew, in the Jewish year 5764, or on the 27th of July 2014, the Temple Mount faithful followers were seen here at the Western or Wailing Wall, wearing sackcloth and mourning for the destruction of the temple. But once again, they failed, as in the many previous years' attempts to go up and enter the Temple Mount and lay the 2 cornerstones already cut and ready in 2001. Not give a permit by the Israeli government to enter, they were stopped at the Morabi Gate on the bridge to the Temple Mount by the security police of the Temple Mount. A photo of another temple cornerstone march to the Temple Mount, which was held on Jerusalem Day, commemorating the recapture of Jerusalem in the 1967 Six-Day War, on the 27th Iyar, the second Hebrew month, in the Jewish year 5766, or on the 25th of May 2006. Here is another Jerusalem Day march on 27th Iyar, the second Jewish month, or on the 21st of May 2009. The relentless tenacity of Gershon Salomon, who never seemed to give up, is seen here again, walking on a crutch with his 2 marble cornerstones, which is, as usual, for 20 years, have been loaded onto a truck with large blue banners and Israeli and Temple Mount faithful movement flags, and move around Jerusalem to be laid at the top of the Temple Mount, which until today in the year 2022 is still unsuccessful. He had been doing this for the past 33 years since 1989, without fail on major holidays, even at the height of the COVID pandemic in 2019. Watch the Temple Mount and Eretz Yisrael faithful movement, Jerusalem, led by Gershon Salomon. He could be the human instrument God will use to start rebuilding the third temple prophesied in the Holy Scriptures, by laying its foundation and his 2 cornerstones, which had been cut, consecrated, and ready for over 30 years since 1989, when it was first quarried in a hill by Ezra Elafi, a stonemason. Here is temple priests robed themselves in the flags of the Temple Mount and the Land of Israel movement, walking on the Mograbi Bridge towards the western gate of the temple.
Terry, there's a rumor afoot that the Jewish people, the Israelis, are planning to rebuild the temple, or at least there's a move among them that people want to rebuild the temple. And I was reading today in the book of the prophet Ezra, and I thought it might be instructive because they had a second temple that was built in his day. And here's what it says in Ezra chapter 3. Now, when the builders had laid the foundation of the temple of the Lord, the priests stood in their apparel with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, with cymbals to praise the Lord according to the directions of King David of Israel. They sang, praising and giving thanks to the Lord, saying, "For he is good, for his loving kindness is upon Israel forever." And all the people shouted with a great shout when they praised the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. Yet many of the priests and Levites and heads of fathers' households, the old men who had seen the first temple, wept with a loud voice when the foundation of this house was laid before their eyes, while many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not distinguish the sound of the shout of joy from the sound of weeping of the people, For the people shouted with a loud shout, and the sound was heard far away. So that was the building of the second temple. When the foundation was laid, it was delayed, then they finally finished it. And that was the temple when Jesus was here. So that temple was then later destroyed by the Romans. Nebuchadnezzar had destroyed it once before, then the Romans. And now there is no temple, but there are people who want to rebuild the temple. So tell us about it.
Well, on June 7th in 1967, Israeli forces captured the city of Jerusalem in what was called the Six-Day War. After nearly 2,000 years of exile, the Jewish people were close to their dream of a new temple. But that dream lasted just a few days. The Temple Mount was later returned to Muslim authorities, and 4 decades later, Jews are still forbidden to worship there. But that hasn't stopped some people from making plans to build the next temple. Here's Chris Mitchell in Jerusalem.
We dreamed to come back to this place, to the Temple Mount, to meet again our God.
The Temple Mount is the seat of God, the place the Lord would choose. Hamakom asher yivchar Adonai Elohecha.
Every day, 3 times a day, Jews recite this prayer. May it be your will that the temple be speedily rebuilt in our own time. It's a prayer they prayed for almost 2,000 years.
But Jews here in Jerusalem are doing more than just praying. Just a few steps away from the Western Wall, rabbis and craftsmen are building what they call a temple in waiting.
We're supposed to build a temple, and nothing about that changed. Nothing about that commandment changed.
Chaim Richman is a director at the Temple Institute in Jerusalem.
The Temple Institute is actively engaged in research and preparation for the resumption of the service in the Holy Temple, to the extent of actually preparing operational blueprints for the construction of the temple according to the most modern standards.
This menorah is just one of several vessels created for the next temple. It's covered with 95 pounds of pure gold and has a price tag of $2 million.
Piece by piece, the third temple is taking shape, with priest garments, vessels of copper, gold, and silver, and a new generation of Levite priests, specially trained for temple service.
We have enough in place now to resume the divine service and to build the temple. But obviously, a lot of things have to happen in order for this to happen.
Richman isn't the only one who's ready to rebuild.
You actually have blueprints, architectural drawings for the third temple.
3,000 years after King Solomon built the first Jewish temple, another Solomon is laying the foundations for the third.
From the womb of my mother, I have a task and a mission in my life, which is connected with the rebirth of Israel.
Gershon Solomon leads a group called the Temple Mount Faithful. They commissioned these cornerstones for the third temple. The 6-ton stones were consecrated with water from the biblical pool of Siloam and cut with diamonds.
And why God commanded us not to cut them by iron? Don't forget that these are stones for the house of God. They cannot be like other stones.
For several years, Solomon and his followers tried to place the stones on the Temple Mount, and every year they were stopped by Israeli police.
Unfortunately, weakness of the Israeli leadership did not allow us to bring the cornerstone to the right place. The end-time temple should be built on the same location of the first and the second temple.
But that location is already occupied. The holiest site for Jews is also the third holiest site for Muslims. And neither side is ready to share.
The Temple Mount, 35 acres of it, is the most explosive piece of territory on the face of the planet.
In 2002, Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat told an Arab newspaper that the Israelis found not a single stone proving that the Temple of Solomon was there, because the temple was not in Palestine at all.
The issue of the temple, it's so sensitive.
Dr. Yusuf Nache is in charge of tourism at the Dome of the Rock. Here's what he had to say when I asked him about the Jewish temple.
It's not an undeniable fact. It is theories, and the political situation, the misunderstanding, the mistrust distorted all the facts.
That is stupid, because the Arabs themselves, they call Jerusalem the place of the temple. And the Golden Dome right behind me, the Dome of the Rock, was built in order to replace Solomon's temple. I think this temple denial is more serious than the Holocaust denial.
To counter this so-called temple denial, Gabriel Barkay is pushing the archaeological envelope. Muslim law forbids any digging on the mount itself. So instead, Barkay's digging through its trash.
We have here the entire history of the Temple Mount.
He and his team are sifting through truckloads of debris, unearthed by bulldozers and discarded by Muslim authorities.
So there could be artifacts in here going back to the first and second temple? And
yes, there are, no doubt.
Among their finds, a Babylonian arrowhead from the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC, and this 2,400-year-old Hebrew coin, the oldest ever minted in Jerusalem.
Do you think in your lifetime there'll ever be a time when you can actually investigate what's under the Temple Mount?
No, I don't. I'm very pessimistic about it.
Some of the most dramatic traces of temple life have been unearthed here at the Western Wall.
This street was part of the marketplace outside the Second Temple. On the walls, you can still see the marks from the fires that destroyed the temple in 70 AD, and overturned stones still lying where they were thrown from the top of the Temple Mount by the armies of Rome.
On one stone is a Hebrew inscription, "To the place of trumpeting." It's a set of ancient directions to the southwest corner of the temple, where trumpeters announced the arrival of the Sabbath 2,000 years ago. Even more intriguing is the part of the Western Wall that's still underground.
Amongst the courses of the Western Wall, the line of stones which we have here, this is the greatest and the most exciting one we have here.
Dan Bahat spent 40 years excavating the tunnels around the Temple Mount, and he says the most compelling case for the temple is yet to be discovered.
I believe that behind this stone is a large arch which forms a storehouse, a big storehouse, which stored all the treasures of the temple. But we don't have till now anywhere where those treasures were, and the only possibility is that it must be subterranean somewhere around the Temple Mount. I believe that it might have been behind this wall.
So do you think it's possible that the treasures are still there?
I hope so. Maybe in the future, when it will be possible to dig, maybe we'll get to there. I say we, it must be my grandchildren, the earliest.
But Bahat's interest in the temple is strictly in its past, not in its future.
There is no chance whatsoever for the third temple. The third temple will be when the Messiah comes, and both of our Jews and Christians are waiting for him. So let us see when he comes what happens. It won't happen before.
Rabbis for centuries did not understand this, and in fact argued, well, are we supposed to build the temple and then the Messiah will come? Or are we supposed to wait and then the Messiah will build the temple?
Again, I could hear the voice of God like he's speaking to all of us. I brought you here to build my house. Build my house.
An amazing, amazing place. If you'd like more information on this, you can go to cbn.com to find out about it. You know, Pat, there's a lot of controversy amongst Christians about this. Does the temple need to be rebuilt, or will there be a sacrifice if Jesus made the ultimate sacrifice?
The obvious sacrifices have stopped because he was the sacrifice and he is the high priest, and the sacrifice and the offering is now in heaven. It's not on earth any longer. But yet we have in the Bible, when it talks about the Antichrist, you know, he will stand in the temple of God, and so people have expected that as a fulfillment. If he is going to come on the scene, as we think in the future, then there would have to be a temple built. On the other hand, if you look at some of the figures of history, the latest, of course, was Titus, the general of Rome, who sacked the temple. I mean, you could say, well, he represented the Antichrist, or Rome was the Antichrist. So biblical scholars differ on, who it is, but nevertheless, this is certainly intriguing, and you see the thrill, but it took hundreds of years to get that second temple built. They had to go through all kinds of problems with the local authorities. They had to have the temple building stopped for a while. Cyrus gave a decree to build it, and then later on, another Persian emperor couldn't find any evidence of Cyrus's decree. And then later on in the reign of Darius, they found Cyrus's decree, and Darius said, go ahead and get the thing built. So the second temple was built under the Persians, but it took decades. And so who knows? But it certainly is intriguing, but a $2 million menorah is a good start along with those great big stones.
Beautiful.
Oh, gorgeous things.
Wow.
But anyhow, it is intriguing. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure there are people who want that series. We haven't gotten it all together, but I congratulate Aaron Zimmerman. I believe Gordon has had a hand in it, and other people, Chris Mitchell, who was voicing that they're excellent reports about what's going on in the that area of the world, which is so important in biblical prophecy.
Shalom and welcome to today's virtual Israel tour. Over the last 2 weeks, we've been talking about some of the amazing outcomes of the 1967 Six-Day War. Today, we want to show you a prophetic shift that occurred when the Temple Mount came back into Jewish hands, opening the door to the building of the third Jewish temple. Some called it a kiss from heaven.
On June 7, 1967, Israeli Brigade Commander Mothe Gur made an announcement the Jews had waited to hear for some 2,000 years.
Retaking this ground was important for a number of reasons. For one, it's where King Solomon built the first Jewish temple. After the Babylonians destroyed it, Zerubbabel laid the foundation stone for a second temple that was later expanded by King Herod. It fell at the hands of the Romans in 70 AD. When Commander Gur declared that the Temple Mount was back in Jewish hands, it rekindled hope for a long-awaited third temple.
The Six-Day War was a miracle of biblical proportions, and was a cataclysmic opening of a new era for Israel and for the whole world.
Rabbi Chaim Richman of the Temple Institute is dedicated to rebuilding the Jewish temple. He sees the time since the Six-Day War as a prophetic shift.
It would be hard, I think, not to see what's happened in the past 50 years as a tremendous jumpstart, a tremendous fast forward. It's more than prophetic. It's like a kiss from heaven, it's like a divine kiss. It's an intimate brush with the reality of God's compassion and love, and he keeps his promises.
The Institute shares a key connection to the battle for Jerusalem. Its founder, Rabbi Yisrael Ariel, served with the 55th Paratrooper Brigade that captured the Temple Mount. After the victory, a Jordanian guide gave them a remarkable tour.
His job was to carry the company machine gun. There's a very beautiful photograph of that. He actually, the first night of the liberation of Jerusalem, he was given the task of guarding over the spot of the Dome of the Rock, which of course we believe is the Holy of Holies. The story, though, that he told us is that the soldiers were on the Temple Mount, and it was just like the first hour or so. And they were approached by a Jordanian fellow in Western dress who explained that he was the official tour guide for the Jordanian parliament, and he offered to take the soldiers and show them the sights on the Temple Mount. And he takes the soldiers, with the rabbi there, and he says, well, this is exactly where the sanctuary stood. This is where the altar stood, and then this is where the menorah stood. It tells him all these things about the history of the Holy Temple. Finally, the rabbi asked him, why are you telling us all this? And he said, well, we have a tradition from our fathers, they from their fathers, that one day the Jews would wage a war and conquer this mountain and rebuild the Holy Temple. And I assume that you're starting tomorrow. And I want this to be my part in helping you.
What was their reaction to that story?
Well, gosh, I guess Yes, they were pretty surprised, but the bottom line is, in hindsight, it doesn't look like we were ready.
50 years later, that's changed, with the Temple Institute preparing blueprints and gathering official temple elements, such as the priestly garments. Richmond is also dispelling myths about the temple on today's digital loudspeaker, YouTube.
Let's start at the beginning. What was the Holy Temple really all about?
All of this means talk of rebuilding the temple is no longer considered a fringe idea.
Today, there is a lobby in the Knesset of how many members of Knesset that are constantly speaking about Jewish rights to pray on the Temple Mount. There are members of Knesset that actually talk about the rebuilding of the Holy Temple. Do you understand that 20 years ago, these people wouldn't have been given a moment on prime time television in Israel to say these things? They would have been laughed out.
So a few years ago, this was considered fringe?
Zealots, lunatics, peculiar. Today it's mainstream.
One of those members is Yehuda Glick.
10 years ago, there was not a single member of Knesset who ascended Temple Mount. Today, we have 20 of the Knesset members who are interested in ascending Temple Mount, praying on the Temple Mount, and are part in the battle for the redemption of the Temple Mount and for bringing the Temple Mount back into the center of the next step in the redemption process.
Richmond sees the temple through the eyes of the prophet Isaiah, who wrote 3,000 years ago that God's house would be a house of prayer for all nations.
It means basically that there's a God in the world and that the best is yet to come, and that we are so connected to Him and to each other and to that purpose and to all humanity. And it's just a wonderful privilege to be here with you today, to be looking out over Jerusalem and to realize that we're living in probably the most important time in history. If you believe in the God of Israel and you see His hand on His people and you understand the tremendous changes that have gone on over the years, you see that the one who brought us this far isn't finished and will keep His promises.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the Temple Mount, Jerusalem.
It's one of the most sacred, revered, and volatile spots on planet Earth. I'm talking about the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Today, we'll explore the incendiary topic of the rebuilding of the temple with an expert whose views are controversial, to say the least. Today, on Jewish Voice. Shalom and welcome to Jewish Voice, a program to help you to understand the Jewish roots of your Christian faith, Bible prophecy, and world events surrounding Israel. Does the Bible predict that the temple will need to be rebuilt in Jerusalem before the Messiah can return? This question is hotly disputed, but it's not nearly as controversial as the Temple Mount itself. The Temple Mount is probably the most valuable real estate on the planet, and it has been the source of war and conflict for centuries. If the temple is to be rebuilt, how can it possibly coexist with the Muslim Dome of the Rock? Or will the dome, which is one of the holiest sites in Islam, have to come down? Recently, I was in Israel where I met with a gentleman who has a lot to say about this highly volatile issue. Here's a look at my interview with the founder of the Temple Mount Faithful movement, Gershon Solomon. Gershon, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us. I've so been looking forward to meeting with you and talking with you about some of the most interesting and important developments, I think, happening not only in Israel, but in the world. So you were raised from your childhood with a strong expectation of the coming of the Messiah.
Absolutely right. For us, the coming of the Messiah is not only a coming of one person that will come and redeem Israel and then all the world. For us, it is a messianic time. You know, the rebirth of Israel as a nation in 1948, as it was prophesied by Isaiah, in one day, a nation that was lost and spread all over the world by the enemies of this nation, in one day became again a nation, and were not in any other place in the world, but in the same land of the covenant that God gave to this nation.
Gershon, talk about the movement, this movement to rebuild the temple. Is it gaining momentum? In reality, it seems that not a lot of Jewish people are interested in this. In fact, I know that many Christians are. We talked earlier, maybe there's more interest among Christians than the Jewish community. Is it gaining momentum?
Yeah, let me tell you this. I want to bring a similar situation after the destruction of the first temple. When the people of Israel, 70 years later, you know, the temple was destroyed in the year 586 BCE and was rebuilt in the year 516 BCE. And when the people of Israel came, they said, it's not time to build the temple. How can we build the temple? There was a prophet, a great prophet, Haggai. In chapter 1 in his prophecy, he's speaking to Israel in the name of God and saying, you are saying it is no time to build the temple? It is time for you to dwell in your paneled houses, while my house, the house of God, is in renewals, destruction. How you dare to live it like this when I redeemed you? And he said to Israel, if you don't do it, you will pay a terrible price. You know, I will bring on the country that no rain will be. You will not have food and no peace and other things. So take wood and go up and build the temple of God. And I will make pleasure in it. That's what God is saying to Israel at this time. And this is the time that God is saying it even more than any time in the past to build a temple, since I was a kid. When my first great-great-grandfather came to the land, he wanted to build a temple. He could not do it. So he built the Chuva synagogue, the biggest synagogue that symbolized the beginning of the redemption of Israel in Jerusalem. But he shared with the coming generations, from father to son, when the time will allow you, don't wait for the Messiah. Go and build the temple of God. And when the temple of God will be rebuilt, then will come a real peace to Israel. And God will dwell in the midst of you.
Is the movement growing? It seems like
Very
the society
much.
is so secularized.
Yeah, let me tell you, when 67, this godly war of Israel that I believe that was the second stage in the redemption of Israel, the spiritual redemption now. The Six Days War, 67, was not an accident. You know, when Israel was attacked by the Arab countries from all the sides, and God gave us the biggest victory since the time of Abraham until today, when they were defeated. In 3 hours, Israel came back actually to Jerusalem, the biblical Jerusalem, to the Temple Mount, to Judea and Samaria and Gaza, to the Golan Heights, to the Sinai, and it is not a regular event. I was sure this is the time to build the temple of God and start the spiritual stage of the redemption of Israel.
Gershom, talk about the movement,
Okay.
this movement to rebuild the temple, but I want you to deal with the second thing, and that is those that teach that the temple will be rebuilt when Mashiach comes rather than before. How do you answer that?
Yeah, the belief was, especially among the Orthodox Jews, that when the Mashiach comes, he will reestablish the state or the kingdom of Israel. He will regather the Jews from all the world. he will be actually the commander of the Jewish army to get back the land. He will make the wars against Israel and to face them. And he will build the temple. And he will even regather the 10 lost tribes. All these events happened before the coming of the Messiah. And as I told you, the coming of the Messiah is not depending in a person, in an individual Israeli. The idea of the Messiah is an idea of an event, a messianic time that Israel will be together with God. And since I was a kid, and I used to go, Jerusalem was divided, I used to go to the tomb of King David in Mount Zion, and on the roof I used to sit as a kid, hours, looking to the Temple Mount, and I prayed to God and asked him, please give me the privilege to build your house. Give me the privilege to be a part of it. Give me the privilege to convince my people, Israel, to not to wait more, but to build the temple. And then will come the redemption. Then will come the Mashiach.
What a moment.
What a moment.
I was up on the Temple Mount, or I was by the Kotel, and here you see the Temple Mount with this Dome of the Rock, which is a pagan temple. How do you see that happening?
First of all, let me tell you immediately, the temple cannot be built next to the Dome of the Rock or next to the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
So both mosques have to come down.
Yeah, the temple cannot be even 1 inch in the side of the Dome of the Rock or any other place.
Christian, how? How do you see this unfolding?
Okay, let me tell you, you know, people in Israel are afraid to say it, especially our leadership, despite the changes started to be among our leaders.
That's why I'm here in your office.
Yeah.
Tell us the truth.
Yeah. This pagan building should be removed from this place.
But in the natural realm, if I can use that term, the world community is never going to allow that. The Arab community is never going to allow it. How do you see this happening?
Let me tell you, who dreamed that in 1948 will be a Jewish Israeli state in the Middle East, in the same location of the covenant, the land that God gave us? Who believed? Who believed that such a small nation will defeat so many countries and powers that came against this nation to destroy it, to push Israel to the Mediterranean? Who believed? It is not the first time that foreigners built their houses, the pagan houses of worship on the Temple Mount, and they were removed. And I'm not saying it that God should do it. As the history of the relationship of him with Israel, Israel should do it with the blessing of God.
Do you think you'll see it in your lifetime?
Absolutely.
You do?
Sure.
Gershon, I want to thank you for taking the time to meet with us today.
Thank you so much.
It's just been a very enriching experience.
And please say to those friends and even brothers and sisters from the evangelical Christians, the God and people of Israel love you, appreciate you. For the end of the end, we shall never forget.
They're going to hear it from you on television.
Thank you.
מצוות ואהבת לרעך כמוך ומצוות ואהבת את השם אלוקיך. הנני מוכן ומזומן לצטט אבני חולין לשם מצוות בניין בית המקדש השלישי, לעשות נחת רוח להשם יתברך, לקיים מצוות עשה ועשו לי מקדש ושוכנתי בתוכן, ובתנאי ברור שהאבנים חולין ואין הקדש, על פי הכלל בונים בכל ואחר כך מקדישים, ובלי נדר אם ירצה השם רק בעת הבניין תוקדשנה ותשובצנה במקומן בבית המקדש או בסביבותיו, בהתאם לצורך לפי הוראת בית הדין. לב טהור ברא לי אלוקים ברוח נכון חדש בקרבי, ענה השם, כשם שאנו מספיקים אבן זו לכבודך, כך תסיר מליבנו מחלוקת, שנאה, קנאה ותחרות, ותן בליבנו אהבה אחריו.
Jews begin building the third temple on Israel's Independence Day on May 5, 2022, reported by Israel 365 News. The building stones for the third temple are being chipped and stored secretly outside in the Jewish quarter in the old city of Jerusalem to avoid suspicions from the Palestinian Arabs. This is the generation. The children are ready. The holy house or temple will be rebuilt by the beloved living ones is the translation of the Hebrew words here. The third temple is to be rebuilt. Soon, very soon. The third temple on the Temple Mount in the future, when its reconstruction we may soon see its work in progress. But will its completion herald the coming of the Antichrist first as Christians believe, or the coming of the Jewish Moshiach ben David or the Messiah, the son of David first as the Jews believe? In either case, the coming return of Jesus Christ from heaven to his temple in Jerusalem to rule and reign on the throne of David his forefather, as the King of kings and the Lord of lords of all the earth, in the kingdom of God may not be very far off. An artist view of the completely rebuilt third Jewish temple in the future, drawn by the Temple Institute.